Today I am speaking with a friend of mine named Susan. Susan, welcome to the show.
Hi.
And I've been looking forward to this for a long time. Susan and I grew up in the same fundamentalist background, the same school. And when I do preparation for my interviews, I try to put in a little bit of time, usually between 1 and 4 hours. But I'll say tongue-in-cheek that today's interview took about 40 years to prepare for. So Susan, thank you so much for being willing to do this.
My pleasure.
And Susan and I met again at school in kindergarten, not quite 40 years ago, I guess 35-ish years ago. And we just wanted to basically say hello and talk about our stories. I did want to give a brief discussion or intro point of how we've kind of kept in touch a little bit over the years. I was together growing up with you in school, but eventually I did get homeschooled in high school, so I did no longer attend the Christian school at that point. So we kind of went separate ways. At that point, went silent for many years, unfortunately. Before that, we had been involved heavily in things like Bible quizzing, where we memorized, I believe, James, Esther, the Timothys, and Jonah, hundreds of verses, mostly quizzing with Mennonite schools, and of course, lots of Bible classes together. And around 10 years ago, I heard that you had made some changes in your belief system. I didn't fully dig into them with you, but I knew you didn't believe the same as you used to. And I reached out by email, and you shared a little bit of your journey at that point. And I admitted I didn't fully understand what you were going through, but fortunately we left it on a very friendly note, which was good. And then 13 months ago, in September of last year, I deconverted fully from Christianity. And I finally understood where I thought maybe you were coming from. But again, because I didn't know your full story, I didn't really have all the pieces. And so I'm excited to finally hear a little bit more about your journey. And I'm sorry it's taken us 12 years to get to this point from when we first interacted on email about it a little bit. And I'm sorry that we haven't verbally spoken in over 30 years, I believe. But I'm glad to finally speak with you today. So
likewise.
Could you tell us a little bit more about you and what you're up to, and start us off that way?
Well, I guess I better begin with I currently live in Costa Rica. I've been here for about 15 years, which will explain if you can hear some of the Latino music in the background, and we're going to have some probably yelling neighbors. And
sounds fun.
Our internet's not working real well, so I have to hold my telephone here. And I am an art teacher at a private school. I am married and have 2 little boys.
Awesome.
And I was raised super fundamentalist Christian like you, and there wasn't really a way to escape that, to be perfectly honest, until I went to university, and then things happened pretty quickly. And it was insanely difficult.
Could I ask
ever since then, I'm sorry?
Before the university part, could I ask, did you have any cracks before then, or was that the first time the cracks appeared?
Oh, yeah, no, I definitely did. But I mean, as you know, like the way we were reared, so people understand religion wasn't a practice, it was a worldview, and it was completely integrated into everything we did at every moment. And for me, everyone I knew, family and, community, our community basically was a small Christian school where my parents taught, and a small church, Faith Reformed Baptist, which is Calvinist, if anybody knows what that is, theology. Basically, that means that since God is all-powerful and all-knowing, even though there's this magical, mystical free will involved, that God must necessarily know and have some control over who is chosen for salvation and not. And it's one of the most heinous ideas that really, really messed me up hugely as a child into my adulthood, still has an effect today. And we can go into that more. But point being, it was a little church, a little school, and my family was part of all of it. And that was my world. And so the idea of separating myself from that was so bizarre and so impossible. I mean, I actually had that thought as a kid, like, well, what if, they might not shun me like the Amish, where, they would literally kick me out of their house, but I wouldn't be loved anymore, is what I was convinced of, because I would be shunned. I mean, I had to ingratiate myself and figure out how to get baptized was like a huge preoccupation, figure out how to convince people that I was saved, convince myself that I was saved, which was a nightmare as a little kid. And there was no escape, therefore, because it was all we knew.
Yeah. It's funny you mentioned the Calvinism. I did get into that at the very end. I mean, it was a long time, but I had been a little bit exposed to it through church and probably a little bit through school, but it wasn't a big part of our theology or worldview. But then at Bible college, I went to Lancaster Bible College for a pastoral ministry degree, and towards the end of that, I got pretty convinced that was biblically the right way to see it all. And it did make sense. There is a logic to it for sure. And I think it tends to draw people into the logic part of it, to say, if you really, want to think through this step by step, it has to be that, God has to be the one that did it all in the first place. Otherwise, he's more just looking down the corridors of history to see what you're going to do. And that kind of deprives him of his power. And so it made it logical. And I kind of went kicking and screaming into it a little bit, but eventually I was like, yeah, this is biblical. And that's pretty much where I was right before my deconversion. It's definitely a mind job.
Well, basically, I don't know. I can sum up that kind of experience for a child with a few memories that are really hardcore and just kind of exemplify. Before I do, I want to put out kind of an advisory, a kind of disclaimer. My story of religion is inextricably connected to my personal story of how my parents raised me and who my family is. And therefore, it's very difficult to tell publicly, because I love my family very much. And I'm actually very grateful that they did their best with what they know and believe. And it messed me up severely. But that wasn't their intention. This is what they think is reality and the world, and in what they think their love for me is and was, this is what they thought they had to do and say and be. So even though I've had to struggle my whole life, with judgment and resentment and, major issues, the reason that I share my story is to help anyone out there who might be going through the same thing or have similar experiences, who might feel alone, as I very much did, with all of this on their shoulders, and who might be looking for answers that they can't find, that might not be there. I don't know that I have answers for you, but I can give you the empathy and the compassion, and that's really what this is all about. So, if this story is shared and aired, and there's anyone who knew me back when, especially from my family, you might want to turn this off, because this is my subjective experience, and it's painful. It's extremely painful, and it involves you. So I will not share names and everything like that. This is not a personal vengeance or vendetta, but it's completely interwoven.
And I could bounce off that just to say too that you do have obviously I haven't spoken to you in 30 years, but just when we were growing up, you absolutely had a heart of gold. And I can vouch that you did bless people. And you did. I mean, I wrote this. I wanted to read from an email I sent to you 10, 11 years ago. I remember often feeling and thinking that as much as I stood out at times for doing the right thing, I looked at you as a backup. I saw you too as someone who always wanted to do the right thing, no matter what those around you thought. And though we were not as close in middle school as in lower school, I always felt like you were on my side and the side of people who were conscientious and who really cared. I knew that if something serious came up, you'd be doing what was right too. And I think that speaks volumes about you and about your desire to do the right thing. And I know that in the context of the past few years, people have probably seen you as having discarded that goodness. But I do think that given your track record of so much intelligence and compassion for decades, your opinion, even if divergent from others, deserved and still deserves respect. I hope you get that respect. I clearly haven't come to the same conclusions you have, and this was back then. I have now. I'm sure you could tell that, but I do respect that you asked hard questions and found Christianity, or at least Christianity as you knew it, wanting, and did what you felt was necessary as a result. And I feel like there is a respect that needs to, like a starting point, that despite the fact that you want to be ultra respectful to other people, there is a respect that you deserve too, that you are not, I mean, you know, all the common complaints people have against people that leave theism. You just want to sin. You're somebody hurt you. You weren't taught the gospel the right way. And it's like all these objections. It's like, no, this is not what this is about. This is Susan. You're an awesome person with a heart of gold. You've always loved people, and you've always tried to live your life to bless people. And I remember that for years and years and years, even as from the youngest parts of our childhood. And I feel like as much as you want to, really be sensitive in how you step through this, I just want to start off by saying you do have the kind of heart that I think people need to hear. I think people need to hear what you have to say. And I'm honestly very, very grateful to hear your story. Anyway, with that,
Well, if you want my makeup to run and make a mess of me right from the start before I even get to tell my story, well done, Tim. Thank you.
My apologies.
Thank you. And a couple things just immediately popped into my head as you're saying that. One, just thank you. That means a lot. And just it made me recognize a certain level of truth in that, like, at the same time, the flip side to this moment, it's so hard for me to hear something like that and even hear any kind of compliment, because it was beat into my head that I am worthless, that I was worthless. And we need to get into that. That's huge. It's a huge part of this. But I also need to flip that right back at you and say that you were always someone that I looked up to and admired. And you were so strong in who you were. And we would tease you. and
it was deserved.
No, but always in a loving way. You were not the social norm. And I worried for you sometimes because you were reticent to communicate. And, because of your intelligence and your thoughtfulness, it was hard for you to fit in sometimes with other people. Not that I was any queen of popularity, but despite that, I always really admired your fortitude, your strength of character, and it is also an honor to be able to reconnect after all these years. So thank you for that.
Sure, thank you. But before you touch, there's one other thing I wanted to really make sure I mentioned. This has been much shorter, but I did just want to say, I know you will probably say I don't need to say this, but I am sorry that 10 years ago I couldn't be more of a support for you. I'm sure you understand why I couldn't at the time, just like I understand why other people can't support me right now. But having crossed this bridge, having deconverted fully from Christianity, gratefully, gladly from Christianity, I now see things very, very differently. And I know that, like you said a few minutes ago, it's a very lonely road. It's very painful at times. And especially if you haven't, I mean, I've spoken to some people where it's like a slow process. And so they've developed other friends that have different perspectives. But if you haven't, if it's just like it's Christianity or it's nothing, and that's your circle, that's your world, to break from that is very painful. And I mean, it was crushing. I've heard people go through depressions. I did not, it was interesting. But I deconverted in an hour. I thought about it for about 18 months, and when it was over, it came crashing like someone opened the floodgates. Within an hour, I was deconverted, and it was like my mind was just blown. But when it was over, I was like, I could be depressed, but I just escaped the biggest mind job of history. I'm kind of grateful for that. I'm going to be glad of where I'm at. And so I didn't have that depression, but I know it's a lonely road. And I just want to say, I want you to get your story here after this, but I want to say I'm sorry that I couldn't be more of a backup for you back then. And I'm glad for whoever did back you up. I'm glad you got some support, and I'm sure, here, there, and I'm glad they were able to stand up with you with it through all that.
Well, that's lovely, but it's also silly because you can only be who you are, when you are, how you are, and we all have to go through it when and how it happens. But yeah, I think it will be interesting for other people to hear both of our stories, because they are, even though they're so connected and so similar, they're also so different in that, again, I mean, here's an example of your strength and fortitude and your intelligence, that you just were able to grasp the entirety in a few moments and come down with certainty on the other side. And that is something that really took me like 20 years. And it was extremely painful. And I thought that I had, gone through it. I thought that I had made my decision, but so much of the emotional damage was lurking just beneath the surface so severely. And with that, a terrible sense of doubt and horror, that maybe I was wrong. And, all the, all the threat of hellfire and everything else. Again, we were starting to talk about this before, not for my sake, but then when I had children, it came around full circle in kind of a really difficult and heavy way. But if you don't mind, I just want to circle back to those two little stories that I was going to share right before I kind of gave my familial disclaimer, that I think help sum up Calvinism, Christianity, being reared with this mindset. So basically it comes down to, we were taught, I believe but I can speak for myself, that humans are essentially sinful. Like we are born completely corrupt, completely sinful, and filthy, dirty, unlovable, unworthy, worms beneath feet, disgusting, horrible excuses for existence. And that our only hope for any kind of redemption was if outside of us, this God that is so much, above and perfect, that we can only, grovel and beg and cry and say, excuse me, I beg forgiveness for my existing. Only if that God reaches out and decides to show mercy and accept us because of his doing, nothing that we can do. Okay, so there are many different sects of Christianity that say, good works are important, good works are necessary, good works can make a difference. But with Calvinism, no, because Calvinism, basically, you are chosen before time, whether you're going to go to hell or go to heaven. But there's some kind of free will involved there. So somehow God knew the type of person that you would be who would choose it or not. It's very bizarre how that works or not. But essentially, this God, because of who he is, not because of any good on your part, will deign to rescue this filth beneath his feet, for which, for the rest of our lives, we basically have to pay by being, completely indebted and groveling through eternity and hating ourselves at every moment, because at any moment we're going to relapse to the evil, disgusting things that we are. And only by, focusing on the Bible, by praying every day, by, can we even achieve something that is worth communication with this deity. Okay, and that's where like good works does come in. So imagine being raised this way, where you're a little kid and you're told you're worthless, and that's a good thing, because God is so wonderful that, he's going to rescue you from yourself, which is horrible. And but we must be vigilant, because at any moment you're going to show your true nature, which is evil. And so here you're this little kid, just trying to figure out life and who you are. And the consequence, by the way, is hellfire. I mean, the worst possible torturous thing that people can imagine will happen to you. And Satan is real, and demons are real, and they're everywhere, and they're always around you, and they're always trying to snatch you to hell and get you to do the wrong thing. And on top of this, with Calvinism, you don't know if you're chosen or not. So I have an older brother who is extremely gifted. He is probably on the spectrum gifted. He's a Mensa shoo-in. He's basically a genius. And he also has an extremely passive and docile nature. And so he's my older brother. And my parents, being inexperienced parents, I think just kind of assumed, oh, this is how kids are. And this is great. And aren't we good parents? And so my brother, it was very easy for him to do the right thing, to behave, to follow my parents' every wish, and to go right into Christianity exactly as they expected and hoped. I have a bit of a fiery and passionate nature, and it was not so easy for me to be a part of my family, which, as I mentioned, is inextricably connected with the religion, and it's completely impossible for me to separate them, although I very much tried later, because don't throw the baby out with the bathwater, right? I tried to go through that later. But anyway, I'm afraid this is a long intro, Tim, so if at any moment you want to interrupt, let me know.
I was just going to add, what you're describing is, it's what's been on my mind very recently with the idea of the abusive nature of this worldview. Not to say that people ever intended to be abusive, but I would just add the one picture that comes to mind is, as a little boy, or for you as a little girl, your nature as a human, the humanist side of you, when you see someone suffering in pain, your natural response is to cringe and to feel bad for them. So here you are being shown pictures, and here I am being shown pictures of this man on a cross, dying with nail prints, a big spear cut down his side, a crown of thorns, blood dripping down, and if you've seen that Mel Gibson movie, you know how horrible this was, and no doubt, for anyone historically that it did happen to, it was horrible.
The Bible is super violent.
Yeah, super violent. But then you're told, by the way, this man that's on that tree that's dying this way, you're the reason. You're the problem. He did this for you, and if you'd been the only human, he would have done this. It had to do this and would have done this for you. And to me, it's like it's preying on a child's best instincts. Preying on their instincts to say, I have compassion. And you're like, of course I'm sorry that I did this to that wonderful man. Of course I am. And I just, oh, my heart breaks for kids seeing that stuff. I can't imagine.
It's awful. I would cry myself to sleep so often. I was terrified as a child, terrified every single night that I went to bed. I had this teddy bear, Tatey, that was like my comfort object, right? And I had it 3 to 13. I slept with this thing. Still have it upstairs in my closet. And I had this ongoing thing with God, that God was going to take Tatey from me, because he knew that deep down I loved her more than him, because he was so big and distant and scary. And I didn't, trust that I was accepted by Jesus, because when I prayed and prayed and prayed, I never felt anything. Okay. So he knew that I actually loved Tatey more, and he was going to take her from me, or he was going to send me to hell because of it, because you can't put anything above God. Like, this is the kind of mind that destroyed me daily and nightly as a child. I would cry myself to sleep, beg Jesus, please come into my heart. Please come into my heart. Please come into my heart. I'm sorry. I'm so horrible and worthless and lowly. Please, please, please. And I wouldn't feel anything. And I knew that it was me, but I thought, okay, either it's just not happening because I'm not ready, or I'm unworthy and I'm going to hell, punto, period. Or I'm sorry, I got distracted. Latino neighborhood. Or I'm just not, I don't hear the voice yet, because I'm not, either it's not going to happen, or it's not happening yet because I'm not worthy yet. So, but I would think I just don't have enough faith. Like, I just have to believe. I have to trust. That's the thing. I have to trust, even though I don't feel and I don't see. And then I would go to my mother and I would say, and I would be freaking out about this, right? Will she believe me? Will she accept me? And I will say, Mommy, last night I accepted Jesus into my heart. And remember, all of eternity is is like riding on this. And she would look at this little child, desperate for acceptance, desperate to be loved, desperate to be reassured she's not going to hellfire, and say, are you sure? Are you sure? No, I'm not sure. How can I be sure? No, I'm not sure. Right? And I had that same issue. We were dropped off. We had a very, very tiny little upbringing, tiny church, tiny school, house, just that was our world. But we got dropped off at this vacation Bible study one summer. I was about 6, probably, maybe less. And there was like a ton of people. It was really kind of overwhelming and scary for, someone groomed for small circles. And I was separated from my brother because I was in a different class. And like, we ended up in this weird, like, dark room in a basement with this old lady with some felt board, just like sticking things there. And she did the, what's it called? The call, where, okay, is there anybody who's not saved in this room? And what are the little kids gonna say? That's like, did anyone stab Jesus personally today? Raise your hand. Right? But I did because I was like, all right, I can't get answers at home. Maybe these people know. I'm gonna admit it in front of all these people. I think maybe I'm scared about this. I think maybe I'm not saved. And, she looks at me like I just did something really wrong. Okay. And she like brings me into this other little dark room, makes me kneel down, repeat after her, dear Jesus, please forgive me for being such a horrible, wretched, blah, blah, blah. Please come into my heart. And then she says, congratulations, you're saved. And I start crying and I say, no, I'm not. No, I'm not. No, I'm not. I didn't feel a thing. I'm not. Right? So how is this not emotional abuse that's going to mess you up for life?
Yeah.
Mothers and fathers, think about this, please, because you are beating it irrevocably into your child's head that they are worthless. This is going to affect every relationship they ever have. They are going to look for partners who also, like God or mommy and poppy, withhold approval and are judgmental and critical and maybe are distant and cruel, because that's what I have been raised to think I deserve.
Mm.
And that feels like home. And that feels like love.
Mm.
Because those are the definitions that are ingrained into my cellular structure of what those things are.
My experience was similar on some of that. It was not to that level, but the one part of that I got was the flip side of, once you know that you're saved, it was, I questioned a lot. Like I got re-saved 6 or 7 times. I was like,
oh yeah,
maybe I didn't do it right the first time.
Me, it was like 100 times in my first 6 years.
I do want to add 2 little stories real quick if I could. One is just, since you mentioned your parents, your mom. One, this is not related to the deconversion, but just funny story. I had her as an English teacher, and I wrote this essay for one of the projects, and she gave me like a 98, 99, but she didn't have anything negative on it. Like there was no marks. It said, you had a misspelling. This doesn't make sense. It was a great essay, awesome. And I went up to her after class when she gave the papers, and I said, I'm just curious, what could I have done to get 100? And she said, well, if this was a math class, 2 and 2 is 4. That's correct. That's 100. This is not math. This is art. This is writing. The only person that's perfect is God. God is the only one who can write something that's perfect. God alone gets 100. You never get 100. And I argued with her for a good 10 minutes. And finally, she literally said, Tim, I'm not doing this anymore. Sit down. We're not arguing about your 100. The best you get is a 97 or 98. It was quite funny, but it was an interesting lesson.
No, you know what's messed up is that is still with me. And when I became an art teacher, I was a 3rd grade teacher for a really long time, and art teacher of high school is a relatively new position for me. But with art, I have the same thing. Like I won't give 100s because it's subjective, and I want them to always be pushing and growing, and who am I to say? And I had a kid who just argued it with me and totally proved her point, and she made me have to move my scale up. And I mean, my level for 100 is still that they go above and beyond in some way, because I mean, I do like teach visual art, it is,
Yeah.
It is, I believe, but yeah, I mean, it's rooted in that, like, you can never be perfect. You are not perfect. And I mean, that is true in life, what's perfect. But just the idea of never being good enough is what it comes down to. Never being good enough.
Yeah.
And what's worse is being much worse than that.
Yeah.
No matter what you do from birth, you are evil and unworthy.
Yeah. Exactly. And I do want to add, just in light of what you started with, respect for your parents. Your mom was certainly not being mean to me in that. I appreciated her teaching. She was a good teacher, and she certainly had a heart of gold towards her students. But I always remember that. I did want to add, though, to the other story, because what you just said is also very relevant. This idea of you're not good enough. One of the things that I struggled with a lot over the years was, and what I'm about to say has nothing to do with my deconversion. This is totally unrelated. I deconverted not because of anything about people or hurts. My deconversion was purely based. I did an in-depth study of where Judaism and Christianity came from. But having said that, there's still things from from the story that are still very painful. And one of them was, I don't know if you knew this, but I had severe insomnia pretty much from almost the time, just a few years after we met. Do you remember in math class when we learned how to take a fraction and make it into a decimal? Like 1/4 equals 0.25? Literally the hour that I learned how to do that. And I'm not smart like your brother is. I'm not Mensa, and this is going to sound like a.
I would argue that, but go ahead.
It's going to sound like a smartness thing or maybe a mental OCD, but for the first year after I learned how to do that, I did that nonstop. Every class I was in, every conversation I had, all night long, I literally would cry myself to sleep to try to stop doing math facts. The one I loved is 1/7. I found like these shortcuts, like, and I can still say it, 1/7 is 0.142857, and it repeats. But like I did that over and over and over and found shortcuts, and it stopped after a year, which was good. But for the next 25 years, I had severe insomnia. And actually, that's why I moved to Georgia from Pennsylvania, because there's a very special doctor here who cured it in 1 month with no medicine. It was amazing. It was all left brain, right brain stuff. But regardless, I spent 25, 30 years with insomnia. And part of that, very reason I bring that up here is I often wondered, like, is this a punishment for something I've done? Like, and the whole, and I don't think that they necessarily, like in youth group or whatever, they drilled it into me, but it's like, it was this sense of God loves you unconditionally, but what you sow, you will reap. And, don't be deceived. God is not mocked. And the idea that, like God gives all these blessings to Israel, but he also says, if you don't worship me, I will curse you. I will kill you. I'll have you even get so bad that you'll eat your own children. And it's very much like, I will love you unconditionally. I mean, the biggest one is I love you unconditionally, but if you don't love me back, you will burn in hell. But I will love you unconditionally. But it's like, it comes out in different ways. And anything like that where I just thought, I am not doing well in this area or that area, I just thought, I must be doing something that's really angering or just displeasing God, and I must deserve this. I mean, and I know, again, that's not necessarily the main reason I deconverted, but it's a big part of the experience, and it is abusive because like when you just think, okay, what would life look like if that paradigm weren't part of it? I would just purely think, I've got insomnia, I've got a chemical imbalance, or I've got something. I need a really good professional doctor to help me figure out how to get to sleep at night. But instead, you weave it into this spiritual stuff, and you think, I did something to deserve this. And that happens in
The layers are ridiculous.
Yeah, endless topics like that I could go into.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I mean the same was with me. My deconversion, I mean, obviously necessarily had to do with things that I was going through emotionally, socially, intimately, but it was also just it mostly how it happened was just I met people. And I couldn't send them to hell. And then, with that came the research. And I'm sure that you've done more research in a year than I did in 40, because I got to a certain extent where, because I was trying to uproot Christianity necessarily left this huge black hole. And I was very Kierkegaardian about it. It wasn't just that like, oh, okay, well, I don't need that anymore. If that's not true, what is, right? Mm-hmm. And so I was hysterical to fill that void with, of answers from somewhere else. But the problem was, when I studied, Buddhism, Hinduism, Islam, it was just all the same. And I couldn't, for the same reasons that I couldn't with Christianity, I couldn't go with any of the other religions. And it wasn't just religions. This all happened in university, and I was really good friends and hung out with the majority of the philosophy department, even though that wasn't what I was studying. And I read, most of the stuff that they were reading, and we talked about it. But that's really how it happened. I had I basically had 3 universities chosen for me. I won't even get into that. And 2 of them were Christian and 1 wasn't. And I decided, just to open my horizons a little. And it was for some other reasons that I went to this other one. And I just started meeting people, and they were beautiful people. They were intelligent people. They were moral people. They didn't believe at all. And we had been given such a black and white view of the world. And what's more is I was prepped, really prepped. Like, I had ethics courses with my own father. I had Christian perspective courses where, through the tunnel vision, they would say, okay, here's the rest of the world. Here's their silly little arguments that obviously we can disprove from this and that. I thought I had all the answers, okay, if I meet someone from this philosophy or this religion, I know about them. I know how they started, and I know how to answer back, it's because of this and this and this that, it doesn't make sense and Christianity is right. So I thought I was armed with all the answers. But it was so much bigger than that, because it was about people. And we were told, this is right, and these are right, and everything and everyone else is wrong, and they are going to hell. And it turned out to be the majority then that were going to hell. But it wasn't just numbers, it was individuals.
Yeah.
And I remember having a conversation with my father as it was all, breaking to pieces, because he's a theologian of repute. He's an author of many books, and has always been extremely respected in the church and the school and everywhere else. He was, always called the walking concordance. He's a very intelligent man and has all the answers. So I talked to him quite a bit, as this was all falling to pieces. And I remember telling him, crying my eyes out one time. I said, it's like Christians are on this little lifeboat watching the world on the Titanic and saying, oh, such a shame. If only they would come, but there's not enough room on the lifeboat for everybody. And the vast majority of the people are on the lifeboat. And the vast majority of the people I love and care about now are on that lifeboat. So, I mean, not the lifeboat, on the Titanic. Like, the vast majority of the people are in the Titanic, and the people I love and care about are there. So guess what? Yeah. I'm going down with the ship.
And from a Calvinistic perspective, even if there were lifeboats, you're not necessarily elect to get on them.
Exactly. Exactly. Like, you're not chosen. You're not, a woman or child.
Yeah.
I'm doing a lot of air quotes today.
I remember at Bible college, I went to Bob Jones University for my freshman year, which was pretty much it was an interesting time, is where I got exposed, ironically, to Calvinism. But in terms of the majority of my time, it was at Lancaster Bible College. And I had this professor there who was very, very Calvinistic. And we were talking about it one day in class, and the point basically got pushed that even if you could, if God were to ask someone who is burning in hell literally right now, just burning alive, would you please repent now and come to heaven? That unless God had, officially elected them, they'd still say, screw you, God, I'll do anything but bow my knee to you, purely because they weren't part of the elect. And it is a very sad perspective, and it goes back in large part to this whole idea of the tribal warfare. And I don't want to get into my reasons for disbelieving, because I want to focus on your story, but just to add this briefly, this started as tribal warfare. People who are already believing in Yahweh and Elohim and his, Yahweh's wife Asherah, all these people, tribal people, fighting over this, their land and the cities, and different, fighting for wives and so forth, fighting each other, and you start to get all this, we're better, no, Jacob have I loved, Esau have I hated, and it's like it started from tribal warfare. And I can't help but, like, when I step back from this whole thing, to look at Christians and think, and I don't mean like me versus them, like I was part of you all, but it's like you got sucked into tribal warfare. Like, do you not see that? You got sucked into a tribal warfare story that just grew, and eventually, by the time of, when Christ would have been alive, if there was a real Christ, it turned into sectarian warfare, where there's a lot of little Christianities fighting for which Christianity's right, and it wasn't like, oh, there was this Orthodox one and they just beat down the bad people. No, it was a bunch of Christianities all arguing with each other, and eventually one of them had a stronger voice, but that doesn't make them right. It's like this whole thing is tribal sectarian warfare gone mad, and that's what you've inherited. And I'm like, is that really what you want to raise your kids based on? Anyway, I know you agree with that, but I just want to add it. It's big on my mind these days.
Yeah, no, it's so exclusive. It's so judgmental. And I had these questions since I was a little girl, but, Daddy, Mommy, what about people, that have never read the Bible, and people who, the missionaries haven't talked to yet, or what if they're really good people, but they just think something else? I mean, I was basically told my own grandparents were going to hell because they had a slightly different version of Christianity. And I mean, and that was actually a game changer and killer for me when my grandfather passed, when I was in college. And well, both my grandmother and my grandfather. But I mean, and again, this is a personal note that would be painful for my parents to hear, but my dad gave the eulogy, and it was just all about Christianity and the importance of, you better get on board. And I mean, I knew that he even had doubts as to whether my grandfather was going to heaven. So to like stand in front of his coffin and like nothing was said about my grandfather. In no way did it honor him or his life or say anything about him. It was just like a moment to proselytize. And that was a break for me as well. I mean, there are a lot of personal things, but it has to do with that exclusivity. It has to do with we're right and you're wrong. And there are just so many things about the Bible that are so messed up. And since I was a little girl, were things that I would talk over and over with my dad. I mean, just about everything involving women. And I was not raised, sorry, Mom, I love you dearly, but by powerful women to be a powerful woman. I was raised in an extremely machista society. They were loving and they thought that they were doing it according to, God's will and structure of everything. But, women don't speak in church. Women cannot be preachers. Women cannot, basically anyone intelligent and interesting and thoughtful and powerful in my life, my whole childhood, was a man. I mean, there were a few good women and some of them really stand out to me. But all of my stuffed animals were boys. I wanted to be a boy. I wish that I could have been a boy growing up. And later analyzing this, it had to do with the way life was presented in the Bible and therefore interpreted around me. And there's this one story that I could never get over, and I did an art piece about it in my 20s. And that's of Jephthah's daughter. I think I told you this before. So you probably remember I am a while away from the Bible, so I've forgotten all the chapters and verses I've memorized. But where is it exactly? Do you know?
I believe that's in Judges.
In Judges.
Yeah, Jephthah, I believe, was a judge.
So there's this story of a man who is fighting one of God's genocidal wars somewhere. And he is not doing so well. And so he begs for help from God and says, look, God, if you hook me up here and let me murder all these people in your name, I will then sacrifice the best thing, first thing that I see on my land. That goes for you. I'm going to make this amazing sacrifice of, you know, the first ram, the first sheep, whatever I see. And so he wins. And then he comes back home in triumph. And who comes out to greet him but his lovely young daughter playing the tambourine? Yay, daddy's home. Yay, you won. And he said, well, that's the first thing I see. And I said to God that I would sacrifice the first thing I see.
Yep.
What? And I remember reading this as a child and saying to my dad, okay, this one is not okay. How can you explain this one? Right? Because there were a lot of this ones, but this by far was the worst one. This shook me to my soul. How is it fine for a little girl or, you know, whatever, young woman to be murdered by her father because he made some, and my dad said, it's to teach us that our promises have deadly consequences. I said, that was his promise, not her promise. What did she have to do with it? What did she have to do with it? And that was a seed planted because I associated with that girl. And what listeners at home need to understand is that my family believes literally in the Bible. Like their interpretation is that everything that is written is not a metaphor. It's not, you know, a literary device. It's real. So that's what makes it. I mean, if he had said this, you know, this is a story to teach us, like, obviously, you know, he wasn't going to actually kill his daughter, but the lesson is, no. They believe that he killed his daughter.
Yeah.
And that he was justified in doing so because the higher power demanded that the promise be kept. Yeah. But what about her? And that is what just stuck with me and grew bigger and bigger and bigger. What about her? Yeah.
I've been thinking about a related story. That one hasn't come to my mind a little bit, although I honestly, I want to look that up in terms of an astrotheological background. Do you know what I mean when I say astrotheology? Like the Elisha and the 42 children and the two bears, you know, where Elisha,
all the numerology.
Yeah, it's I mean it's not what it looks like. I'm sure that, you know, some people would say, oh yeah, there was a man named Elisha, and there were really two bears that came out of a real forest and really killed 42 children. But it's very clear that, you know, he is, you know, Elijah was a picture of the sun. He was a picture of the moon, and the two bears are Ursa Major, Ursa Minor, and the, you know, the 42 kids with constellations. So I'll have to look up chapter to see if there's any.
That is so cool. I want to definitely learn more about that.
Yeah, it goes right to the cross. I mean, I'll share some stuff with you offline too, but, you know, Jesus.
Please blow my mind. I want to know.
Jesus being crucified between two thieves is the people that knew what that meant would have said that's about the stars. we know, we can see the two thieves, you know, and when we visually look up, you know. So anyway.
Wow.
But the other one that's to go back to your illustration, Abraham with Isaac, like so this is one of the things that struck me, like is Yahweh really different? So he's saying, I'm holy, I'm like nobody else. So everyone else is supposedly, you know, doing child sacrifice. So finally he comes to Abram and says, I want you to sacrifice your child. I'm sorry, but if you want this man to be a just, good man, his answer is going to be, hell no, I will never kill my kid. Of course not. And yet he's seen as like this wonderful, you know, because he did it by faith. It's like,
right?
I'm sorry, if anyone comes to me and says, I hear a voice in my head saying, go kill my kid, I'm sorry, I'm calling the police. You're not a good person. This is not about God. This is about you need some drugs and to be tied up. And yet
that
he's
always
praised.
Really bothered me too as a kid. Obviously, like you're looking at your parents then and being like, they're saying they will do whatever God says, and they're saying that is okay because God said, like,
well,
as if we don't have enough terror of God and Satan and the demons and our unworthiness. Now we know that our parents think
Yeah. Well, I actually asked a
Infanticide is
Christian,
all right.
I asked a Christian parents once about the stoning issue, like where it says if your son is, consistently rebellious and disobedient, and people seem to take it as like an older son, not a little boy, but like an older son. Um, if he's consistently rebellious, take him before the elders, make your claim, and then everyone, including you as the father, you stone the child to death. And I asked this parent, if you were in those times, would you have done that? And the answer was, as you would expect for a literalist Christian, of course, I'll do anything to obey God. Why wouldn't I obey Yahweh? And it's just like, it's mind-boggling. Can I ask? I do want to get back to your story. When you were going through this, did you have anybody asking you, like from the Christian side, saying something like, Susan, obviously you're changing. We don't know where you're landing, but something's changing. Can you tell us what you're learning and what you're thinking about that's causing you to change? Or are they just like mine? Nobody wants to know. They're like,
they don't know what to do. No, it's really weird, and that to me was horrifically painful too. They barely lifted a finger to save me from the fiery pit.
Yeah.
And I don't know. Again, this is going to be a really personal thing. Parents, cover your ears. Before I had really started to earnestly research and separate myself, there were some major rifts happening my first year of university, but I hadn't really followed them yet. But they were definitely there, and I was having more and more questions with my father, especially. But I was also debating, like I guess I should have mentioned that in elementary school, I was in the shadow of, suspect and doubt, and, the shadow of my brother and everything else. In high school, I had finally managed to, convince everyone and myself that I was saved and I was part of this. And because of my family, I think more than anything, I just kept getting plucked out for more and more leadership roles. And by the time I finished high school, I was the main leader of this youth group, and I was student council president, again, plucked out, not really my choice, and, head of this and head of that, and, frequently chosen as Christian leader of the month or whatever. So I started university pretty gung-ho, thinking I am going to keep we would get these scare stories, right? Like, okay, you got to stay strong to your faith when you go out into the world, because, this person, we thought that they were so strong, and then they got corrupted. The world is wily. The world is strong. You need to be strong in your faith. And I was like, I got it. I know all the answers. I'm going to stay a nice, strong Christian. And then I got to the world, which wasn't even the world. It was this, tiny little liberal arts college in the middle of Bumble Poop, PA. and I tried to go right to the InterVarsity, like Christian group, but they were scattered, and immediately they glommed on to me to be like a new leader, even though I was just a freshman, and I was having my own doubts and questions. Basically, I tried to start my university experience, gung-ho with Christianity, but it was just wave after wave of too many interpersonal experiences that just clashed with what I was taught. And along with this, there was a relationship where I had a high school boyfriend who was a very strong Christian, and, we had wanted to get married and things like that. And I was pushing away from him. And he asked for my dad to sit down with the two of us and kind of counsel us. And my father said to him, you know what, this is bigger, I think, than just you and her. I think that she's rearranging and searching her whole worldview right now. I think she's pushing away from Christianity, not just you. And I think it's kind of out of our hands type of thing. And it would break his heart to hear this. And it's not true that this, was the only impetus, of course, but I hadn't fully gathered or purposefully decided at that moment that that's what was happening and that's what was going to happen. But his lack of faith in me and kind of dismissal of, the painfulness and the difficulty of what I was starting to go through did push me in that direction. It's like, oh, okay. So I'm being dismissed then. Am I just that easy? Like, that's how much you believe in me? Like, that's how much, I don't know. It was really painful. And that continued much worse in that any kind of questions that I had, any kind of major situations in my faith, and like, I had to go to them and say, this is what I'm going through. What do you think? What's your answer to this? And again, this is difficult because it's also just kind of socially how some of my family is. And again, I don't want to bash them. I don't want to drag their names through the mud. But it did hurt very much that if that is seriously what they believe, that I am damned to an eternity of hellfire now. If I really thought that about my children, I would camp outside their house and beat the door down and kick and scream and do everything within my power to rescue them. And nobody did that for me. It wasn't until like 20 years later almost that an uncle of mine, who is actually very active on the flip side here, he's got his own ministry called The Third Choice, trying to address people who are also kind of on the fence or have Christian backgrounds and have deconverted or lapsed or whatever it is. He came to me and said, by the way, I'm just curious, for a friend, what made you become an atheist? And I was like, wait a second, what? is that what people say? Like, I'm not even an atheist. I wouldn't label myself that way because I don't believe strongly enough in anything. I haven't found answers, and I have looked strong enough to say, beyond, like, we know as humans to the extent of the universe that there is no power greater than ourselves that, might be something we don't understand or can explain. I don't believe in any religious God. I do not at this point. And I've researched many religions, but I still can't label myself as an atheist because I don't. Too often people say, oh, well, then you know it all. Oh, well, then you're just as religious as the rest. You're just preaching anti-God. And I don't like to be associated with that. And he was the first one to really try to sit down and talk to me in depth. And he wrote to me for like a year, really beautiful interpretations of the Bible that I hadn't quite heard in that way. And he was really open. And I know my parents would if I approached them. And they are doing their best, I think, not to scare me away, perhaps, or open a can of worms, or, I'm sure they have their own reasons that, are based in their loving choices or whatever. But nobody really fought for me. Nobody really, oh, well, she's decided to go to hell. Okay. And that drove me even farther. I mean, that was hard.
It's funny you say that, because there's been a lot of little issues in my deconversion where like there was an issue, but the meta context became like a second issue. like what you just said, like the people who chased me back into the gospel or into heaven was zero. There was nobody. But in a similar vein, like the genocide issue, which we'll go into it, down the line. But like I was concerned about genocide, teaching genocide, a genocidal worldview, but I was also realizing, on top of that, this context of like I knew that was part of the worldview, and it never bothered me. Why was that? It's like it's not genocide; it's the issue of why doesn't it bother you? And there was a whole bunch of issues like that that didn't. It was like a two-sided, like a double whammy.
It never bothered you, really? Like when you were a kid? I mean, those were questions I always brought to my dad. Like, how is it okay that they're like wiping out? I mean, are they all evil?
I say it to my shame, but to be honest, no, it didn't bother me. I'm not saying
You
I
just
can't
kind
remember.
of took it in course with the story. You believed what you were told.
I mean, you take it in the sense of number one, if hell's real, God's going to do it anyway. So if he does it through a local tribe to a few, 1,000 people or 100,000 people or whatever it was, and then he's going to do it en masse in hell anyway, in a much greater extent, like who cares? God's God. He's the king. He can do what he wants. And it's very much like a kingship issue. If he's the Lord, he's the master, he calls the shots. And that's part of the brainwashing issue that we'll get into, I'm sure, later.
It's okay if he wants to step on these anthills.
Yeah.
He's been nice enough to scoop up these in his hand.
Yeah, exactly. Well, could I ask with that the way you said, you would just be camping outside, knocking on their door, please, please, please come to heaven, come to the gospel. The fact that Christians don't do that, does it ever cross your mind? And this is I'm just brainstorming here, but as I thought through that, and I've thought about this a couple of times, do you think it's an indication that on some level they really don't believe it? Because it's logically, if someone's really going to burn, you would do anything. I mean, there's so much at stake. The fact that they don't do it, it's almost like a little hint. You don't actually believe this. It's kind of like a similar one, like when you have a death in the family that's like totally unexpected. Like I had one where someone in our family died very young, and it's obviously horrible. It's a horrible situation. You feel terrible, but the Christians are like the mopiest, saddest about it. And I'm like, that person was a believer. They're now supposedly in glory dancing with their Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. You're going to see them again relatively shortly compared to eternity. It's pretty short time to wait. They're fine. They're not in pain anymore. What are you so sad about?
Yeah.
But the fact that they're so sad almost makes me think, on some level, do you not believe this? I don't know. Does that ever cross your mind?
Well, it was actually a big push away when I went to university, because it was my first exposure to the secular world, and I was running around like a chicken with my head cut off trying to convert everybody. And I mean, not like in a really socially weird way so much, although I suppose it was. I mean, I had a roommate who did some kind of drug and came back to the room all tripping, and I thought she had seen demons because I was so naive, and was trying to not like exercise her or anything, but and I was like waking up this girl from the Christian group, like, we have to pray for her. And the girl didn't, know that she had taken anything. But she sat with me and prayed with me, but there was a weariness behind her, kind of like, okay, well, this rookie is so gung-ho, but she'll realize soon enough. I don't know. I think that's also just human nature, because when we are faced with overwhelming horror and tragedy all the time, even more so with the internet when everything's in our face. I have to deal with it with my older son right now, who's in 6th grade and just starting to get exposed to more, of the terrible things that people do together. And he has this beautiful sense of injustice. And I remember feeling this, like, wait, how can people do this and nobody cares? Like, nobody's doing anything. Like, if there's world hunger, we have to solve it. We have to solve it right now. And you just get to a certain point where you're jaded and you do your little bit and you take care of your family and you send some money when you can and you write a couple letters, but what else can you do? Because there is a small sense of what else can you do. You either dedicate your life to pure activism, or you try to balance a tiny little both, or you just say, I do what I can with mine. And I think Christians are that way too. So, I mean, yes, it bothers me, and it bothered me significantly. And it definitely directed me to see certain levels of hypocrisy. But I think there's some of that too, where we can't be trying to convert everyone at all moments. Some people do that, I guess, but I don't know. They're just human too. And I think there might be a little of that, just like, sorry, I can't save everybody. I can't solve world hunger.
Yeah. There's definitely, for our second half of this, just to dive into the issues of cognitive dissonance and all that. There's a lot of that going on. I do have to ask, I was going to ask if we could end with a little bit of sarcasm for part one. How do you, just being honest, when you reject a book that's full of racism, murder, genocide, land theft, stoning, misogyny, genital mutilation, animal sacrifice, human sacrifice, rape, cannibalism, child abuse, animal abuse, theft, incest, betrayal, lying, and slavery, where in the world do you get your morality from, Susan?
Well, they did such a beautiful mind to me. It took me many, many years to trust that I could even have my own and trust my own. But as I wrote to you in a letter questioning what do we do with our kids, we were raised that the Bible is the moral compass. Morality only exists a little bit in the Bible, and it exists a ton everywhere else, which was also one of my big divorces from it, because I met so many people who were just not only good, but so much better than so many people claiming to be Christians and saved. And I mean, they themselves will be like, well, it's God, not me. I'm not worthy, blah, blah, blah. But morality exists. And we can raise our children with what is right and wrong and do our best with that. And your moral compass doesn't come from that book.
Yeah. If it did, we'd be in big trouble. Well,
I don't let my oldest son is an expert on mythology. He's obsessed. He loves Greek mythology, Norse mythology, Hindu. He can, he has a mind like a trap. His memory is ridiculous. He hasn't read the Bible yet. I haven't told him he may not, but I have purposely kept it from him. That's how messed up it is to me, and frightening and loaded with horror, that the things he reads in the other mythologies where gods and goddesses are cutting off each other's head and doing this and that still seems a step above. I don't know.
Yeah. It's funny you say that too, because some of the Christians that I've come across recently, they're more into this response of, well, you just got exposed to the literal Christianity. If you had been exposed to the liberal side, you wouldn't really have as much of a concern. And I'm like,
I tried that one too.
But even if you say you or I went that path where we're just, oh yeah, liberal Christianity, whatever that means to people, the danger of it, there's something about this book and the way that it's impacted world history that to me it's so frightening that even if you gave it a liberal spin and said it's just about living a good life, well, you could say that for yourself, but if you give it to your kids and they take it seriously, then within 1 or 2 generations, you're back to the literalism stuff. And it's got to be shown, which, it's not hard to show this, but it's got to be shown as mythology from day one. And if you want to take some good moral principles from it, that's fine. But you can get all the principles from, especially a lot of Greek philosophers. A lot of it does come literally directly from Greek stuff. I'm going to show in some of my presentations that some of it's just literal quotes And the epistles are quotes from Plato and the other philosophers. But if you want to go to it, I'll turn the other cheek. Well, that's fine. But once you go down that literal path, you've got to start looking at hell. You've got to start looking at exclusivity, and you've got to start doing blood magic. I mean, that's another big thing we'll talk about later. But you got to do blood magic. You got to do scapegoating if this is literally from God, and that once you go down that road, God
It's
he
dark,
cannot
it's
forgive.
scary, it's gross.
Yeah, like he can't forgive unless he has a lot of violence and a lot of blood. That's where liberal Christianity doesn't appeal to me, because once you open the doors,
it always circles back. And I felt that too, because I tried, as I got older, I said, okay, it's inextricably linked to my parents and my family and who they are. So can I take it out? Can I take it away? Can I look at it with a different perspective? Can I talk to people who have totally different interpretations? And I did, and I tried, but there was just this visceral response, this horror. And this is for next time, but that followed me to the grave. Okay. Because a lot of people will say, well, you'll change your tune on your deathbed. I've been on my deathbed. I spent 3 years with cancer. I was touch and go for about 2 years. And in that time, I absolutely positively revisited, is this God trying to reach me again? Is this God punishing me? And I tried to pick up the Bible again, and I tried to go back. I tried to convince myself, and I couldn't. With death in front of me in a way that only people who have really been there can understand. It's a totally different level when you know that you're dying. And I mean, I was given 6 months, 5 years most. I couldn't go back because it was horrible and false, and I couldn't.
Yeah.
So that's another conversation for another day, but that's how strong it is with me. And I know a lot of this has been kind of personal and emotional. And for those of you who are looking for more factual things, stay with Tim. He's going to give it all to you. But I've also been there too, not to the extent maybe in the depth that he has been, but I've read a ton, and I've explored a ton, and I've talked to a ton of people to come up with my decisions or lack thereof. But what overwhelms me to this day is the emotional impact that seriously affected me through my health, of this worthlessness that is beaten into you from your earliest memories.
Yeah. Yeah, you're worthless, and you're culpable for a whole bunch of stuff that happened.
Guilt, and not Catholic guilt that never goes away. Yep.
Yeah. I'm just curious, when you see people, and this will be the last question for today, because I do want to go into a lot of these other aspects, and I don't want to tease too much without actually diving in deep, so we'll do this. But when you see other people, I paint them this way, good salt of the earth Christian families, they never had these experiences, in their opinion. You say something like, Christianity is a version of psychological abuse on people, and their response is something like, oh yeah, I'm so abused by knowing God loves me, was willing to do anything to save me. They love this stuff. They love it through and through. Where do you go with that in your mind when you hear that kind of, you see it? And
well, I think you and I are a little bit different here, Tim, in that I also do feel, I mean, it's circular, it's cyclical, right? But if it's not hurting people and that's what they want to believe, but I mean, what we're saying is that it does hurt people, but it is true that it doesn't hurt everybody. Like, some people manage to hold on. I mean, my brother is one that I can think of that seemed to manage to hold on and slightly reinterpret, but basically stick with the same story, and get through life and be okay and raise beautiful children who feel the same. So, I mean, who am I to say that they can't and shouldn't? But it's just, it's so dangerous and it's so dark and it can be so all-encompassingly destructive. It's hard when you're on the other side to explain to someone who's not, and I know they feel the same way. So in that, like, I'm not somebody who's going to go out and try to convert people. I'm not, because everyone is in life at a different place for different reasons. But if there's anybody who is aware of their suffering, who has suffered, who doesn't know if they can handle letting go, especially if that is your whole life, as you know, that's really, really hard. If that's all you know, if that's all the people you know, if suddenly you are floating in the void, still with these feelings of worthlessness and guilt, but no direction for them, it's a nightmare. And I just want to put my story out for anybody who might be in that situation and encourage people who might not be entirely firm on what they're doing or have the reasons for what they're doing to explore with an open mind and research, not just books, but talk to people. I think that's something that's happening really badly in our world right now is polarization. With our Facebook feeds that only give us what we want and what we agree with and everything else. Try to broaden your horizons and talk to other people who, think differently than you and keep your mind open.
Yeah, good words. Good words. Well, I've got about 20, 30 questions probably here, and I wanted to bring in my story at some point too. So I've got a whole bunch of things. I'm excited. No, it's good. I'm excited. I did my fair share. I'm excited though to hear, and I definitely want to maybe pick up with your story about the physical issues and what you went through with that. But I definitely want to hear more about where you're at with things now, and I'd also love to hear, on our next visit, a little bit just about your life on the other side, because one of the things is that this stuff is a lot to think through, and for someone like me, I'm choosing to keep in it, but there's also a sense of, okay, well, now that this is mythology and it's not real, you're free to live of your real life now. So what does that look like? And I haven't dove into that too much with you, but I'd love to kind of dive into that, and also just love to ask you some questions, the next one, about your artwork and just a whole bunch of little questions like that. So hopefully we'll get to that before too long.
All right. But you don't have to be such a lovely host either. I really do want to hear your story. And I know that you're giving these talks all the time, so maybe you're getting it out there outside of this interview. But please dive in at any moment so that it's a fruitful conversation with both sides.
Sure, absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Susan. This has been just awesome. I was looking forward to this for a long time, so I appreciate you making the time.
It's so nice to talk to you again after all these years. I mean, we've written, but it's different. It's nice to meet your beautiful family, and thanks for inviting me. Thank you. This is nice.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's do it again soon, and thank you so much, and hope you have a great day with your family too the rest of the day, and just thank you so much for your wisdom and your willingness to share.
My pleasure.
Thanks, Susan.